Time now for the Stark Report. It's brought to you by Team Nissan, the spot where the checkered flag drops. Dulcie Drive and Violent. Check out all the new pre-owned inventory at teamnissan.com. As ESPN.com senior baseball writer Jayson Stark jumps on board. Feels like I haven't talked to him in a while, man. It's been he was on vacation, and I was on vacation, but we are back and better than ever with the Stark Report, to steal a line from Mike and Mike. How are you, sir?
I am doing great. And how are you?
I am good. I'm very, yesterday I had a long chat with one of your colleagues, Jerry Krasnick, about his article. It was really long, in-depth, and I was like, wow, yes. Really well done. And I was thinking about, I wanted to bring you into the conversation on that, is like, is there some talk around the game that, man, the Phillies, that quote that was in there about they are the golden goose really stood out to me as, do people really look at this organization and say, man, that team is in a good situation all of a sudden?
I think if you go back and look at that quote, I don't know if I took it exactly the way you took it.
Well, that's why I asked you.
I took it to mean there is so much potential in this franchise. They've got money. They've got a beautiful ballpark. They've got a fan base just waiting to win, waiting to be. And you have resources available to you in Philadelphia that you don't have everywhere. And I just interpreted it to mean this is a good job. Andy McPhail's job, good gig. Reuben or whoever winds up being the general manager, good gig. And now one thing that's happened is they've suddenly got a future. You and I have talked a lot about the state of the system and where it was and where it is now after all these trades. But I think I mentioned this last week when you were off. I hosted the Baseball Tonight podcast last week and had Keith Law as a guest, and the Utley deal had just gone down. So I asked him, where is the Phillies system now? And he said he thinks they're a top 10 system. There are people who think they're now a top 5 system. They used to be a bottom 5 system not so long ago. And that's a huge change. It's a huge sea change. You're seeing some of the results right now at the ballpark this week, talking to some scouts who have been through Reading, just raving about the group there. And the other thing, Mike, raving about the return in the Cole Hamels deal in particular. So, we can talk some more about the Jerry Krasnick article, but there are definitely some encouraging things happening, but still a long way to go.
Yeah, Jay, and I do want to start with some of the things in there, because when you look at what the Phillies did, I asked Jerry this yesterday about, are people giving Ruben the credit for these deals? Because it seemed like most people feel like he was making the calls, bringing them back to the powers that be, and then they were kind of making the decisions. But do you get the sense that people around baseball said, no, Ruben made these deals. He gets the credit for these deals?
I don't. This is tricky. I have to think back on some of my conversations. I can recall a lot of talk about how they did well. I can't recall a lot of talk about how Ruben personally did well, but obviously he conducted the orchestra, or he did a lot of the work and made the calls. He's going to get some credit for this, and he should get some credit for this, whether the members of his fan club would like to give it or not. But it certainly was not all him. Pat and Andy were clearly involved, and these deals reflect that. I think there was a front office involvement, ownership involvement that was different than what we used to see here under David Montgomery. The fact that this ownership was so willing to include so much money in these deals, that was a change in the way the Phillies had done business. It was changed the way Dave Montgomery used to do it, changed the way Ruben always was interested in doing it. So there's definitely been a shift. It wasn't all Ruben, and that's why I found Jerry's story interesting, because I know you can build a case now that Ruben, because he quote unquote made these deals, deserves to stay, but I'm not convinced that it's going to turn out that way because it's just so hard to read. You'll notice Andy hasn't been quoted about anything since the day of his introductory news conference.
Yeah, that's a very good point, that Andy MacPhail hasn't really come out and credited anybody or said anything about the trades, even mentioning, hey, we really like what we got back in return. Let me ask you your opinion on, maybe you have more than an opinion, but the future of Pat Gillick. Is he going to be in the Phillies organization, just going back to where he was? Is he being pursued by other people? Is he here just kind of hanging out and watching games? What is his future, short-term or long-term, with the Phillies?
Well, Jerry and I talked about this after he had that conversation with Pat, and he came away with a strong impression that Pat's ready to basically retire. He may be on the flow chart as an advisor, but he clearly wants to work less than he's been working. He had himself a good life. Then the next thing he knew, he was interim president and team president for quite some time, more than a year. And I think this is the time when he steps back, because that's what Andy's there for. And I think Andy's going to be the primary voice in the organization now. I can see them asking Pat his opinion on things. I can't see Pat being anywhere near as involved as he's been now, even since he stepped down as GM.
Yeah, and I know MacPhail obviously brought here in the middle of a season to kind of try to learn under him. You would assume he takes full reins right at the end and starts to systematically pick his own guys. That goes back to Ruben. What are the relationship there? Most likely the new guy comes in, he wants to bring his own GM in. Is that still, you said he deserves a shot or he's making a case, but is the feeling still that Ruben's on borrowed time right now still?
Again, Andy hasn't really tipped his hand at all.
Gotcha.
He's hardly talked to anybody in the media. I did sit in his office one night for about 20 minutes, and we just sort of shot the breeze about a lot of stuff. And, he didn't give me a read either way on Ruben and Ruben's future. I can tell you that he has made some calls in the industry to people he knows, likes, trusts, and asked what their read is on the organization, what their read is on Ruben, people who might potentially be good fits. There are going to be a lot of changes in the organization, whether Ruben's one of them or not, so we might be reading too much into that. But I still think it's probably more likely than not that Ruben's not going to be the GM here in another month and a half. That's just a read of the tea leaves, but it's really difficult to know anything definitively because there's such a cone of silence around the group.
I know we talk about the manager, it seems like a lot, but, the players, Cody Ashley on yesterday really said that, yeah, we really like him. You said the players like him. As we get into this final month of the season, is this final month a tryout for him, or is he proven that he deserves at least to be considered? Obviously it sounds like he deserves to be considered, but are the Phillies realistically considering him?
Look, I think there's a realistic chance now that Pete Mackanin is the manager next year. And the reason is he's clearly connected with these players. They've connected with him. They've played a lot better under him, and they're all going to be here next year too. So they're not going to win the World Series next year. They're realistic about that. And so, to have some sense of continuity and some stability, I think is a good thing. And Pete has won a lot of fans with the way he's handled this. But now that we got that out of the way, I don't really know who's making the decision. Andy's been here to watch this, but if Pat is out of the picture and Ruben is not the GM and there's a new GM coming in, it's really difficult to know what that new GM is going to think or want.
That's a good point.
Most GMs coming into a new situation would love to bring their own manager. It's just really difficult to say right now who's going to make that decision. But, if you've watched Pete at work, and we've talked about this a lot, you and me, this is a guy who deserves to get another chance.
I know you mentioned Keith Law earlier. I asked him this question about a month ago, and his answer was, I find it hard to believe that the best candidate was the guy that was sitting next to the other guy for this whole time. And I guess he's basically saying there's got to be a due diligence done here before you just go ahead and for the second time make the interim manager the full-time manager.
Well, that's a good point, but they've always liked Pete in this organization. This is the second time he's been here, second time he's been a coach, and obviously the first time he's been an interim manager. And I don't know why he never got a chance before. I think I made this point to you before. Probably the greatest interim manager in modern history. Took over a Reds team that was 20 games under 500 when he got the job, and they were over 500 the rest of that season. Took over this team, which was headed for like 110 losses. They're not even going to lose 100 now, unless they just go in a complete free fall. When you see a guy in this setting, I think you look at him differently. I don't think the day that they anointed Pete the interim manager, there was any sense that he was going to be the guy beyond October, whatever it is, 4th. I think that has changed. You can see he's managed almost 2,000 games, and he can run a game, and he can deal with people. He can talk to players. He can make them buy in. It's so obvious now when you see it. Look at the Ryan Howard situation. Perfect example. If Ryan Sandberg had sat down Ryan Howard 3 games in a row, which happened last weekend, that would have been a thing in their clubhouse. When Pete Mackanin does it, he calls Ryan in, and he tells him, look, this has nothing to do with you. This has to do with our team, where we are right now, what we need to accomplish the rest of this season, what we need to find out about guys like Darren Ruff. You should not take this personally. It's about more than you. And the next thing you know, Ryan Howard's being quoted as saying he'd love to see Pete get the job beyond this year, and he just got benched for 3 days in a row. Right? That tells me something. I would think it would tell Andy McPhail something.
Good point. Jayson Stark's with us, ESPN.com senior baseball writer here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Let me get your opinion. We know that they got a lot of young players in the trades that are in the minors, but what about the young guys on this current roster? Are there guys that are pieces for the long haul? I mean, are these just young guys that are just taking up space, or are some of these guys, Jayson, the pieces that we will start to see develop into full-time major league players and the next group of players? Are some of those young guys currently playing?
Well, let's start with Odubel Herrera. I mean, could you have envisioned the day the Phillies showed up in spring training that your number 3 hitter for a long stretch of the season would be Odubel Herrera? See that coming? I don't think I saw it coming, but
I don't think I could have told you who Odubel Herrera was in spring training.
You know now, don't you? He's done that, and it's on merit. And I think I told you at one point earlier in the season that the day that he got picked in the Rule 5 draft, a scout who had watched him a lot in Venezuela over the winter came up to me and said, "That's the best pick in the whole Rule 5 draft." And since the All-Star break, this guy's been tremendous. Last I looked, he was number 4 in the entire National League in hitting, top 5 in on base, and his streak actually goes back a lot farther than that. This guy's been a really productive hitter who has made a bunch of adjustments for a couple of months now after that time in the middle of the season when it seemed like the league had figured him out. I think he's a keeper. I think Cesar Hernandez is a keeper. Switch hitter who does lead the team in walks, right? Has good at-bats, can steal a base, and is a work in progress in a lot of ways, but now to see him playing the position he was always supposed to play instead of being fit into a role that he really wasn't suited for, I think he's a guy who at least you're going to look at long and hard and to see what he is. I think Freddie Galvis has gotten better and shown that when you add it, what he does defensively to the improvement he's made offensively, at least in the short haul, he's a guy who deserves to play. I think long term you'd probably like to upgrade there, but he deserves to play. Franco, right? Guys who are here now, who I think have put themselves in that discussion. I don't know if you want to talk about pitchers or not.
Well, I did want to ask you about tonight's pitcher, Aaron Nola, who, if you haven't been paying attention, he's 4-1, and he's got an ERA under 4. He looks like something, obviously, and yeah, if you expand a little bit on the pitching, because you have seen some of the pieces of the Hamels deal already up here, so it looks like at least they're going to give these guys a shot to perform at the big league level.
Well, don't they have to?
Well, we've been asking for that all year. I continue to see Jerome Williams.
Well, one thing that I've noticed about every game I've ever attended, somebody has to pitch, and so you just can't have the young guys on your team assume all the innings. So Jerome Williams pitches, Aaron Herrera pitches. They won't be pitching next year. You tell me what the rotation is next year, pal, and that would explain why we're looking at Aaron Nola, why we're looking at Adam Morgan, why we're looking at Jared Eickhoff, and why there's more to come. They've got to figure out which of their young guys are rotation pieces for next year. And that's a really important thing they need to accomplish. Aaron Nola has come exactly as advertised. He's a strike thrower, and except for that game against the Blue Jays when it seemed like he was a little bit intimidated by their lineup, and he wouldn't be the only one. He pitches. He has a really clear feel for himself, how he's going to get you out. I mean, his stuff, his pure stuff, is really no better than number 3 starter type stuff, which is fine. But the other part of him, the rest of him, is more than that. So it just how he progresses, whether he gets bigger, stronger, smarter, learns to use his weapons. But he's going to pitch in the big leagues for a long time. And I have to admit that Jared Eickhoff has left an impression. 6 shutout innings the first game he pitched, and then has that weird first inning the other night where Odubel doesn't catch the first fly ball of the game, and things kind of steamrolled after him. Then he just totally got his act together and retired, what was it, like the next 13, 14 in a row?
Yep,
and you can see here's another guy, great poise, big boy, swing and miss breaking ball. And, he may have been the last guy in that Hamels deal, right? I mean, if you're going to look at the 5 young players in that deal, he might have been number 5 on the list. He looks like he can pitch in the big leagues. He's already in the big leagues and doing it. And Alec Asher, who would be the other guy who was, there to fill out the deal, he's coming up in September. And, he's another guy. I don't think he's more than a back end of the rotation starter, but you've got something there. And it's going to be important because you've got this inventory of young pitchers. As I was mentioning, every game now, next year, the year after that, every year after that, somebody's going to have to pitch.
And every year previously as well. Jayson Stark's with us. 2 real quick things. The Mets are 6.5 games up. It's kind of that's why I think if you look at the Astros and the Mets, teams like that if you're a Phillies fan, that maybe you have a little hope that things can turn around faster, because I don't know that anybody thought the Mets would be 6.5 games up above the greatest rotation in the history of baseball. But are the Mets going to win the East?
Who's going to catch them? Maybe they get swept by the Nationals.
Well, we've seen them. We've seen the Mets crash and burn before. They blew a 7-game lead with 17 games left at one point, if memory serves.
Outside of David Wright, who's on the team now that remembers that, is scarred by that. Their fans are scarred by it.
Sure,
but I just don't see the scenario where the Nationals, having lost Denard Span, right? Realizing now they're never going to have their team on the field, are going to play these last 30 whatever games and go like 21-11.
And that's if the Mets go 500.
Right, the Mets. It wouldn't be a matter if the Nationals are going to win the East. it wouldn't be because they caught the Mets, because the Mets catch them. And I'm just not seeing it. Somebody described them this week when I was out there as a runaway train, and that's the way they look. They trailed 7-2 in Game 1 of that series and won by 9 runs, trailed 5-0 last night, and won by 4 runs. First team in the history of the National League to have 2 games in one series where you trail by 5 and win by 4. It's never happened.
Nope.
And you look at their team, it's not just Eugenio Cespedes that they've added, realistically. They've added Cespedes, David Wright, Michael Conforto, Juan Uribe, Kelly Johnson. This is a whole different group. They've got a lot of depth and a lot of different ways they can make out a lineup card and score. And it shows. They're averaging, the last month, the last 30 games, they're averaging 6 runs a game. And the 30 games before that, they averaged 2 runs a game.
Right. They were a horrible offensive team in the first half of the year. That has certainly changed. Jayson Stark, last one, your article about safety. I know Rob Manfred was in Philly the other day. It's a really good article about it, and there's a lot of debate about it. Give us an overview of your thoughts on why protecting the fans is complicated.
Well, one of the things I tried to do with this piece is not go the route that a lot of people in our business have gone and said, oh, but, baseball doesn't care about the fans. Baseball needs to protect the fans, and just point out that there are challenges in doing this. And if you're familiar with Rob Manfred's work, it's just not his way to do anything off the top of his head. They're in the midst of a big study that looks at, foul balls going into the stands, bats going into the stands, how often it happens, where it happens, which fans are in the most danger, and they're trying to do it in a way that makes sense. You don't want to just string netting all the way to the foul pole if you don't need to. You don't want to do something in the name of helping fans that actually hurts the experience of being a fan. You've got ballparks that could not be more different. We got a ballpark built in 1912. We got a ballpark built in 2012. We got a ballpark where we got a lot of ballparks now in this day and age where fans are right on top of the action. There's no foul territory. You got a ballpark in Oakland where I wrote the Raiders could practice their punt coverage. There's so much foul territory. And every ballpark's different. Rob mentioned this last night. Every ballpark represents a different engineering challenge, and so they got to figure that part of it out. They want to try to figure out if there are ways to have netting that is retractable, for instance, the way nets behind the goalposts in the NFL go up and down for kicks, and then you don't see them any other time. They want to figure out what height do you need these nets? How far down the line do you need these nets? All this stuff is being studied really scientifically, and you'd hate to have a situation where fans can't catch a foul ball anymore, right? Nobody wants that. Yeah. You'd hate to have a situation where a player can't flip a ball. The first baseman can't flip a ball to a kid at the end of an inning anymore. This is stuff that they're trying to work through so that fans are safer, but that baseball doesn't lose something special that it can't ever get back.
It's over at ESPN.com. It's a really good story, and you just put a lot of great points out there as to why this is so difficult. He's Jayson Stark, ESPN.com senior baseball writer, powered by Team Nissan, the spot where the checkered flag drops on Delsey Drive in Vineland. Phillies tonight as they take on the San Diego Padres. Aaron Nola starts for the Phils. Jayson, enjoy the baseball weekend, pal.
Mike, you too, man. Talk to you next week.
Take care. There's Jayson Stark, everybody, here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN with a look at the Major League Baseball scene and the Phillies in general.